So this is a brief introduction to strategic concept and to the readings you have for this week. So let me start a little bit of background. First of all, strategy is a concept rooted in the military. Actually, the word strategy, if you don't know, is actually derived from the Greek. And in the Greek word for generalship, or the art of leading troops in battle. I believe strategos, the Greek word, means general. So this is about transferring the concept of battle, concept of war, from the field of the military field to the business field. If there are countless definitions of strategy, many, I put what 6 of them up on the screen just as illustration. But as you read them, and I won't, but as you read them, you will see that what they have in common is that strategy is about the future. It's about some sort of differences or uniqueness, depending on how you look at it, and some sort of cohesiveness about what we do, some rational organization, some logic, if you will. And the one other element which I did not list in here, but which is important and justifies the military metaphor or analogy, is that it's about fighting against competitors somehow and being successful in so doing. So that's sort of the general background of what the whole strategy literature is about. And but just as before we move on, to the extent that we are thinking in terms of winning or fighting against some competitors, then strategy must pay attention to both the inside of the organization, that is what we have, the capability, the resources, the strengths we have to fight, but also about the outside, which is, what are the threats, what are the resources, what are the elements outside the organization that will threaten the organization. So strategy is about both the inside and the outside. And I make that point because too often we tend to focus too much on the inside when we think about strategy and strategic planning. We tend to focus on ourselves and maybe not enough about the context, the broader context, the outside world within which we operate. So what I want to briefly go over here is 4 perspectives. There's been a number of people who have contributed to strategy over the years, over the history. I mean, the concept of strategy in business really emerged in the 60s. There were a few books published at that time. Somebody named Ansoff was a significant reference at the time. But I picked those 4. There's a 5th one whom I will talk about a lot more in later weeks, which I will add to those 4. But those 4 today, plus the 5th, are really the most important names, if you will, associated with the strategy. First one is Peter Drucker. Most of you, I hope, have heard of him. He is considered to be the father of modern management thinking. He actually died not too long ago, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. He was, I think, 100 years old, originally from Austria, moved to France during the Nazi era, and then from France moved to the US and did all his work in the US. Or his major contribution, in this country, but the concept, his first contribution was a book called The Organization Man, in which he looked at General Motors, and He's written any number of books, but among other things, he's talked about strategy. Michael Porter teaches at the Harvard Business School and is considered to be the founder of modern thinking about strategy. And his ideas are still the foundations of most of the current work on strategy. Mintzberg, you met him last week. He has written extensively and critically on strategy and strategic thinking. And then I've added Roger Martin, who is a more recent contributor. Most of his writings are from the past 10 years. He's the dean of the business school at the University of Toronto. And I've personally very much like his work. And I think his work represents, over the years, one of the most significant contributions to the field since Porter. I mean, he's added some richness, some additional concept and ideas to the foundation that Porter put in place. The fifth one, whom I will not talk about his work this week, but I will several times in the next few weeks, is Russell Ackoff. Russell Ackoff used to be on the faculty at Wharton, and I worked with him for many, many years, for close to 10 years, when I was on the Wharton faculty. Russ died about 3 or 4 years ago, and made some very, very significant contributions to the field, approaching it from the perspective of system thinking. And I believe if it's not either next week or the week after, I can't remember on the syllabus, I will spend some time on Russ's ideas and how they apply to strategic thinking. But for this week, we'll only talk about those four, and you have 3 articles, one each from Porter, Mintzberg, and Martin. I did not include anything from Drucker, but you can find Drucker's writings everywhere if you are interested in pursuing, doing some more research in that area. In a nutshell, Drucker sees strategy from a perspective of analysis and commitment of resources. But he actually, like most of the others, considered that trying to predict the future is basically a waste of time because the uncertainties are too great. So we have to take risks, and therefore strategy is not about eliminating risk, but about taking the right risks. In other words, finding out what the risks are and then determining which one to take. So for him, strategy is a continuous process of making decisions today that are risk-taking, but are informed decisions based on the best knowledge we have of their future impact. It's about organizing our efforts in order to carry out those decisions, and it's about measuring the results from those decisions so that we can then make adjustment, learn, and proceed. In other words, he looks at strategy as the science and the art of making good decisions about the future, taking informed risks, learning, analyzing the consequences, and learning from those consequences so that we can make adjustments and potentially change what we do going forward. So that's Drucker's perspective. Moving on to Porter, Porter focuses most of his work on the fact that strategy is about coping with competition. And competition can come from a variety of directions and places, but strategy making and strategy is about how we succeed against the competition. So it's about making choices, it's about making trade-offs, and most importantly, it's about choosing to be different. choosing to be different by design, as opposed to just stumbling into a difference. So how do we get to be different? How do we choose to be different? We choose to be different by starting with a value proposition for that we offer to the marketplace, which should be different, and by determining the territory in which we seek to be unique, whether it's a geography, or whether it's a market segment, or whether it's a category of customers, whatever that territory is, but the uniqueness is defined by the combination of the value proposition and the perimeter within which we are going to operate. Essentially, in his view, organization without strategy tried to be all things to all people, and as a result, they tend to be not much. If they try to essentially do the same as their competitors, but trying to do it better, it's unlikely that they'll be very successful over the long term, because even if they are better, the others will catch up because they are doing the same thing. So again, to summarize, his view of a good strategy is that it should have a unique value proposition, different from what others offer. A tailored set of activities, by that he means a combination of activities that are uniquely tailored to the value proposition, uniquely tailored to deliver on that value proposition. The organization should make trade-offs that are different from those that are made by the competitors. And this is extremely important for Porter. Determining what we will not do as an organization is as important as defining what we will do. And that's what trade-offs are. Trade-offs is saying, I will not do this, and I will do that, as opposed to being very opportunistic and doing whatever comes up. So that's a very important point in Michael Porter's thinking. The fourth criteria of a good strategy for him is that there be a very high degree of fit among the activities, particularly those that are tailored to the value proposition, so that they enhance each other. And the point being that the better the fit, the more difficult it is for a competitor to imitate it. When you will see in the article that he talks a lot about how difficult it will be for other companies to reproduce some of the examples that he gives, and I believe if you look at a company like Southwest Airlines or Vanguard, which are some of the examples he discussed, or IKEA, we know what they do. There's no secret as to what those companies do to be successful. But it's very difficult for others to imitate them. And when others have tried to imitate them, they have failed. Best example being in the airline business. A lot of the major airlines tried to copy Southwest and were not successful at it. And the reason why it's difficult to copy is because the fit, the integration among the activities is what makes the difference. And that's what's very difficult to reproduce, because you don't have the experience of doing those things at the level that Southwest and IKEA, Vanguard have been doing them. So this notion of fit is actually very, very central to Michael Porter's thinking. And then finally, the fifth one is about continuity. Because unless you have continuity over time, you can't foster that tailoring, that fit. You can't make it be so tight and so unique. And at the same time, getting better, because as you do things, you learn from what you do and you do it more effectively. So continuity is very important. And that's actually one of the big challenges of strategy, because especially in the initial stages of implementing a strategy, you may not be getting the results you expect. There are bumps on the way. And the question is, at what point do you dump the strategy and change? Or do you say, these are part of the learning curve, we stick with it and we'll be successful eventually? There is no absolute guarantee either way. There are examples of companies that dropped a strategy too early and those that stuck with it for too long. So continuity is important, but you also have to have the judgment to know, or at least to have a sense as to when you need to switch and when you should stick with the program. And there is no real recipe for it. There isn't a test that says if you meet that test, you stay on with it. If you don't meet it, you don't. It becomes a matter of judgment, and that often is the difference between a successful CEO and one who looks for another job. Okay. Mintzberg talks about the 5 P's of strategy. Strategy as planning, strategy as pattern, strategy as ploy, strategy as position, and strategy as perspective. But in the end, it's really the creative or the main contribution of Mintzberg has been his emphasis on strategy as a pattern in a stream of decisions. In other words, as I say here, strategy is about consistency in behavior, whether intended or not. Some of the observed behavior, organizational behavior I'm talking about here, some of the observed the organization that the organization does is a result of intention, and some is a result of what happened in day-to-day work. So those that are a result of intention are deliberate strategies. There were some intentions, and they were realized. And the others are emergent strategies, where the patterns developed in the absence of intentions, or in some cases even despite the intentions, which those intentions then went unrealized, and something else happened. But they led to a pattern. They led to some consistency of action. And then the realized strategy is that combination of things that we intended to do and therefore were disciplined about doing, and things that we learned to do as a result of what happened, and which we integrate in what we do. And that ends up being the realized strategy. And in a context in which organizations constantly review their strategy, review what they do and where they are, then over time they will find that some of the emergent strategies are important and they become integrated as intended strategies in what they do. And that's the nature of the emergent aspect, that the emergent strategy are things that come from, in some sense, doing business, from operations, but the organization integrates those elements, learn from them, and then make them a central or an integral part of their strategy. So that's an important contribution of Mintzberg, because again, if you look at the military parallel, one of the lessons of warfare in the second half of the 20th century was that military actions that are based on command and control, in which the actions everywhere at all levels are determined by the chain of command, so that wherever you are in that chain of command, you only do those things that your superior, the officer above you orders you to do, doesn't work. One of the learnings was that you have to give a great deal of freedom to the individual, the unit head in the field to make decisions. and some of those decisions are have the attributes of emergent strategies as patterns evolve and everyone learns from that, they become integrated into the broader unit strategy. So that's what that notion is. And you will see in the Roger Martin article, The Lie of Strategic Planning, a little bit of a critique, not of the concept, but on how that concept has been distorted to justify not acting as opposed to integrating it and learning from those actions. Finally, now we have Roger Martin. Martin, as I think I mentioned in the introduction to the week's readings, is the dean at the Toronto Business School, the University of Toronto Business School, and his writing is much more recent than all the others. His work, pretty much builds on the traditional perspective from Porter and others. The emphasis that he puts is on the notion that strategy is about dealing with the unknown. In that sense, it's something that is fundamentally uncomfortable, and therefore, in his view, trying to make strategy comfortable by focusing on it, on the planning aspect of it, or just addressing controllable variables such as costs and capabilities, is counterproductive. Usually does not lead to improvement in performance. More often than not, it actually leads to disappointing results because, in effect, you do not address the real issues, which are that strategy is about how do we deal with the unknown, how do we deal with risks. So in the article, he proposes 3 fundamental rules. Number one is that the statement of strategy itself should be a relatively simple statement that clearly defines who the customers or the audiences that we are after are. In other words, who do we target? And what value proposition are we prepared to offer to them? What compelling value proposition? What do we do to make sure that they actually come to us, buy what we have to offer or join us as an organization? That's why I use the term audiences as an alternative to customers, because that may be more appropriate for your kind of organization. But essentially, strategy is about defining who we serve and what do we offer to them so that they want to be served by us. The second point is that strategy is, because it deals with uncertainty, it's about making bets, but it's not about reckless risk-taking, it's about informed bets. In other words, based on a great deal of analysis, knowledge, experience, thinking, we decide these are the risks we want to take. And in that sense, not unlike what Drucker calls the right risks. But they are risks, therefore it's not perfect. Therefore, there's the chance of failure. So what strategy is about, it's not about guaranteeing success, but rather shortening the odds on the bets we choose to make. And the bets we choose to make are based on some careful thinking. And then the third point is that, which in the end may well be the most important is that the logic of the thinking behind the choices we make, the logic, the assumptions that we make have to be extremely explicit, extremely clear, so that they can be evaluated honestly and accurately against the results that we observe, so that we can make the necessary adjustments. In other words, we should design, we should sort of set out our assumptions and the structure of our thinking so that we can have the opportunity to make the necessary change based on what we learn. In other words, the organization has to be capable of learning and adapting. Remember, because strategy is about identifying the bets that we want to make, and because those bets occur in an uncertain environment, that is the future, some of the things we expect will happen as we expected them. In some cases, better things will happen, and in other cases, worse things will happen. In some cases, we will fail. In some cases, we will succeed much, in a much more significant ways than we expected. And we have to learn from that so that we can make the adjustment. We can then do more of the things that produce good results, less of the things that produce not so desirable results. And in order to be able to do that, we have to understand how we came to those decisions in the first place. What were the assumptions we made? What were the trade-offs we made? What was the basis of the analysis we made? So you can see that there's a connection in the way Martin thinks about strategy to both Drucker and Porter. It's about risk-taking. It's about defining value propositions that are well defined for a particular audience. So there's a notion of uniqueness that's there, and also it does integrate the notion of emergence, because again, those strategies are not blueprint, they are not roadmaps, they are a combination of things that are intended and things that occur, and we learn from them to make the adjustment in the next round. So, so those are the readings you have for this week. Again, as I mentioned in the earlier, there is another writer, another author that I will rely on and talk about in the next few weeks, and that's Russell Lakoff. And you will see that some of Russ's ideas are, again, similar, although with some important differences with the ones you're looking at this week. So we will be chatting about those concepts in the forum, and I look forward to seeing your reaction to the material. Let me again emphasize that this material is all about strategy in a business environment. So it's an environment that for many of you is foreign, in which you maybe have not had any experience. But I want you to read it, try to put yourself in that context, to read it in that context first, understand those concepts in the context in which they are discussed. And then, but only then, think about how applicable they may be to your own organizational setups. And again, we'll have plenty of time to discuss it this week and in the weeks to come. Okay, good luck.